So around 2018 or so, there was a meme that floated around. You probably remember it. It said "kill all men," and we all joked about it. Most of us did. Like, it was just kind of considered like, hey, this is a funny haha. And we also had the beginning of the men are trash conversation happening more and more often. So I think there's been a side effect of this. All right, guys. I think it's important to go ahead and get into the first topic today. If you are watching this video, then you'll see I'm probably going to title the video the exact same as the stream. So if you see that title, you've probably had an assumption about what this is going to be about, and hopefully we're going to have a decently fun time with this particular topic, though the actual subject matter is not going to be great. So when you hear the term "men are trash," what runs through your head? Go ahead and let me know in the comments section or in the chat if you happen to be on the live stream. And we're going to get into the fan art section while y'all do that. The very first one here is from Jet. They said, "No thoughts, only gem, Suris. I don't know what kind of gem would be preferred, so I made it amber, also an amethyst version of the slime." I like both of these. I do. It doesn't help that I really like Steven Universe. The next one we have here is from Ivana Dragmeyer. "Waifu Eyes the Black Hole? No. Bloodborne Eyes the Black Hole, complete with a hunter and Suris' trick weapon hammer that doubles as a sword." So Ivana, I don't know if you understand, but my sexual awakenings were both the movie Species and the character Rouge the Bat. You didn't make Black Hole Chan less hot. That you didn't make them less hot. So I mean, there's still a waifu here. So, just so you know. As always, everybody, let me know what you think in the fan art section, not in the comment section below. If you want your fan art to be shown in a future video, the best way to do so is to drop it into the fan art section of the Discord. With that said, hit the like button if you haven't already, subscribe if you haven't already, and let's go ahead and get into today's topic. So I asked a little bit ago, hey, what do you think when I say the statement, "men are trash"? And I'm going to go through some of the things that were said in live chat in order to see what they think. So first one here is from Haster King. "I'm trash, quick recycle me," which is a joke. Ivana says toxic feminism. Toxic masculinities from Sakura. Creamy the Axolotl says, "I think of lesbians." Victor Martinez says, "irony." Morningstar Council says, "a traumatized person lashing out." Weird Girl says, "toxic masculinity again." Rick says, "men treat women like trash at times." Loki the Tired Trickster says, "stereotypes, exaggeration, and simultaneously toxic masculinity and toxic feminism." Kane Waybright says, "men that have an Andrew Tate-like complex are trash." Pedro says, "men are trash equals truth." And the list goes on and on and on. I could go through everything that is said in chat there, but I wanted to go ahead and throw that out so you guys have a basic idea of some of the generalizations, at least that are in my audience, when that statement is said. So around 2018 or so, there was a meme that floated around. You probably remember it. It said "kill all men." And we all joked about it. Most of us did. Like, it was just kind of considered like, hey, this is a funny haha. And we also had the beginning of the men are trash conversation happening more and more often. So I think there's been a side effect of this. We've began these particular memes as funny haha things, and then slowly, over time, I actually think that we've started to adopt them. There are a handful of people, and I think it's enough of a vocal minority on the left that even in places like Twitter, it may seem like it's more of a majority. There are people that are willing to dismiss men's issues as a result of stuff like this. We say all the time on the left that jokes have meaning. When somebody says a transphobic joke, when somebody says a joke about race, when somebody engages in this type of humor, we always talk about the fact that maybe there's something lurking underneath there. But when we make these jokes about men, that same energy doesn't seem to generally come up. Everybody just kind of smiles and nods and agrees that, yeah, men are trash, men are garbage, men are X, Y, and Z. We don't maintain the exact same energy when it comes to the way we delineate between this thing is just a joke, haha, and that joke can actually cause problems for X, Y, and Z person. There's a trend that I've noticed over the course of the last few years, and that is that masculine men who specifically consider themselves masculine. I'm not saying my descriptive version of a masculine man, but somebody who legitimately would use that term to define themselves, largely don't slide to the left on the political spectrum. Take a person who considers themselves a centrist, and let's say that they legitimately just they fence it. They don't know where they sit on issues. That's it. We're not talking about a hashtag enlightened centrist. Take that person and then ask yourself, if this person describes themselves as a masculine man, and that is the description they are comfortable with, which side of the political spectrum do you expect them to move in the next 2 years? Do you expect them to move further to the left or further to the right? I would expect this person to move further to the right, typically. And my reasoning is this: the right wing has capitalized historically on the idea of capturing masculinity in a bottle and selling it to you. When you think of the figures who are prominent on the left wing, in the politics sphere, we have people like, and this is as far to the left as you're going to get in American politics, unfortunately, but you're going to find people like AOC and Bernie Sanders. Not exactly, quote, pillars of masculinity. The closest you might get is, say, maybe even Vosh. Maybe. Somebody who's willing to actually, ride that particular stereotype into the sunset. But when you think of the right wing, you have a myriad of people that come up to mind. You have Joe Rogan. You have people like Alex Jones that at least think that he's a man's man or a masculine man. You have people like Andrew Tate. You have people who embody this idea, however twisted. You have people who try very hard to embody this idea. And when they do, lo and behold, would-be allies that exist and consider themselves, quote, masculine men, or otherwise celebrate masculinity in some way, they end up gravitating towards the Joe Rogans and the Matt Walshes and the Andrew Tates of the world, because these are the people that they see as signifying these values for them. Because for them, the value that they're looking for most is somebody who celebrates this aspect of their identity, their masculinity. Now, if the idea of somebody gravitating towards a content creator who celebrates an aspect of your identity sounds familiar to you, then everybody who is trans and follows PhilosophyTube and ContraPoints for the exact same reason can maybe understand and empathize where I'm going with this. We have a tendency to latch onto creators, for better or worse, who embody certain virtues that we either want to have ourselves or we think are good and prominent. And within the manosphere, however you want to describe that toxic cesspool, the idea of masculinity is a celebrated concept. It is a very celebrated concept. And so people who embody those ideals are people that you'll end up gravitating towards, and then lo and behold, the people who embody those ideas are celebrating that masculinity as well. We don't do a good job of dealing with this on the left. We end up losing people who could be would-be allies over to that side. Now, I know what the counter-argument to that is. There's an obvious counter-argument to there is like, hey, if somebody is so superficial that they are willing to move over to that side simply because the person is an embodiment of masculinity in their eyes, then they weren't a good ally in the first place. But I need you to know, I need you to stop, I need you to quit, I need you to stop everything you're doing right now. You and that mentality right there are the exact reason that you experience shrinkage in your movements. When you are not willing to bring people in, even for those superficial reasons, your movement gets smaller and smaller. And sure, you curate it and you get only the best of the best in your movement. But when we're talking about political movements cannot be small. Small political movements fail because small political movements don't have a voice. This is why allies are always important. You want people on your side who may not necessarily agree with everything you say, who may not necessarily agree with everything you do and are, but you want them on your side because the alternative is them being on the side of your enemy. The alternative is them being on the side of the Walshes, of the Shapiros, of the Andrew Tates. We have a very bad habit of losing people to this masculine manosphere group because that group affirms them. If your masculinity is something that is so important to you that when somebody is constantly trouncing on it, and I'm not talking about a conversation about toxic masculinity, I'm talking about the literal men are trash, kill all men style conversations. When people see that and experience it, even as jokes, more often than not, that can breed a certain type of sensitivity. How do I know this? I've witnessed it. Where I live in Georgia, that is a common sentiment, and I have seen people and talked with people in my real life, day to day, who listen to people on the right wing instead of people on the left wing because they don't want to hear people shitting on men. They don't want to hear people shitting on masculinity. And they hear that all the time. And it starts to hurt them. And then they start realizing there's a double standard. How many of you follow the Twitter account Ask Aubrey? I'm not saying that Aubrey is a bad person or the person who runs the account is a bad person. I'm not. But there's an interesting thing that happened. Andrew Tate went to jail. And good, dude deserves to rot in jail, but there's tweets on Aubrey's Twitter, and I think I'll pull up one of them. I'll pull up one of them here real quick, so you can see what I'm talking about, because this will make a lot more sense here. Okay, so if we can agree on the left that body shaming is bad, body shaming is horrible, because even if you're body shaming the right person, even if you're body shaming a good target, your friends and allies that would support you are watching you do that, and they are making judgment calls based on that. So, when a tweet from Ask Aubrey says, "This dude is their top G, laugh, 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 laugh," and we see this super unflattering picture of Andrew Tate, who has not been able to have his head shaved in a while, has a super receding hairline, has things that people would commonly consider, quote, beta male characteristics. When we see people clowning on that, and I've done it too, when people clown on that, it's funny, it's cathartic, it's great, but then we run into a problem. We've done the same thing that we accuse other people of doing. We're engaging in that same type of body shaming, and now we've created a double standard for ourselves. We have a really bad habit on the left of pretending that there are no bad tactics, there are only bad targets, but that's just not true. Because when you engage in bad tactics like this, again, would-be allies, people who are sitting on the fence, they are willing to move one way or the other for the most superficial of reasons. And again, you need them to move to your side. Because it's better to have those allies fighting for you than swelling the numbers of your enemy. And you can talk about moral purity, and you can talk about how much better it is to not have them in your movement. You can do that as your movement shrinks, and as it gets hurt, and as you find that you are having less and less ability to maintain proper legislation, and as you lose votes in political offices, you can take that moral purity and superiority till the cows come home. But it won't win you any votes. All you're going to be doing is creating enemies that would have been friends. All it takes is a little bit of kindness. All it takes is a little bit of understanding. We don't talk a lot about men's issues on the left. We talk a lot about women's issues on the left, about issues of minorities on the left, about issues of people who definitely 100% matter on the left. But a lot of times we disregard or simply don't talk about the issues of people who exist on the majority. And the reason we give for this is almost always some form of, well, they've had their chance to speak, or, well, they're already represented enough. You know what's happening, right? When we stopped talking to these people, the Joe Rogans started talking to these people. When we stopped talking to these people, when we stopped speaking to the hearts and minds of these types of people, Andrew Tate came along and did. People who exist in the toxic cesspools of the manosphere began recruiting better. And you know what happens when you have things like the slogans "kill all men" and "all men are trash" and shit like that? And then we have funny memeable clips that are thrown up on TikTok and YouTube of, you know, asking a celebrity, do you think men are useful? And they immediately say, well, useful for what? What are they useful for? Do you know what happens when you see that constantly and your friends are the ones retweeting it constantly? The exact same thing that happened when your friend was tweeting out transphobic shit and retweeting transphobic comedians and having a laugh about it, and you decided that you didn't want to be around that person anymore because you were trans and they were hurting you. It's the same thing. The only difference is majority versus minority. That is all that has happened here. The only functional difference is how many people are involved. But guess what? You do need that majority, otherwise your movement fails. So maybe we should talk a little more about men's issues here on the left. And I'm not just going to talk about talking about it, we're going to bring up a couple of them right now. I've had pushback on this when I've talked about this in videos before, but I'm going to go ahead and say it right now. People who are assigned male at birth, we get a shit end of the stick when it comes to finding relationships. It is infinitely easier for people who are assigned female at birth to find relationships statistically, by and large. I don't care if you individually have a hard time finding a date. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about data. It's harder for guys to find dates. And you know what happens when guys are lonely? When guys are lonely, they start falling down these rabbit holes, these emotional rabbit holes. The same thing that happens when everybody else is lonely. And one of those rabbit holes, unfortunately, is the manosphere. And it's a terrible one to fall down, and you can blame the person for falling down the rabbit hole all you want. But throwing that blame on them exclusively is to pretend that you're just morally pure and you've never had anything bad happen to you ever. And this issue extends to a lot of areas. We could talk about how this relates to trans issues, how it's a lot harder sometimes for people who are assigned male at birth to feel like they fit in their own skin if they're trans. And how sometimes it's easier to mask masculine traits than it is to mask feminine traits onto yourself when you've been dealing with things like a receding hairline for multiple years, because that's just a thing that people who are assigned male at birth deal with more often, more frequently. The Tara System, thank you for the $1.99 super chat. Our media shows men as sex-obsessed womanizers. We see the idea of the deadbeat dad constantly in media. We get these unrealistic stereotypical portrayals of men in media that get ingrained into our systems. But you know what's funny about the deadbeat dad thing? Somehow the conversation about how hard it is for dads to actually get their children in divorce proceedings gets lost. It gets just swept under the rug a lot. And then when you try to talk about how hard it is for guys to win custody battles for their children, we start hearing about women's issues again. And here's the thing. Talking about men's issues does not mean that women's issues don't matter. And of course, every gender in between, but we're sticking with these two for this conversation because especially in legal proceedings, assigned male at birth and assigned female at birth are usually what we're going to be dealing with. When people get dismissive of men's issues because women have issues as well, if we did the same thing, if while talking about women's issues, some guy came up and started talking about men's issues, you would immediately think that the dude's being a fuckwit. The dude's being an asshole. The dude is trying to take your conversation and bend it to his own will. Guess what? It's the same thing that's happened the other way around. Homophobia exists within men more than it does within women by and large. And a lot of that comes down to our views of masculinity. When a person is trying to come out of the closet as gay, it can be very hard if their idea of masculinity does not include gay men. And it can be we can show examples of masculine gay men all we want, but it doesn't change the fact that it becomes that much harder for those people. I already talked about how hard it is for men to find relationships by comparison. It's very, very difficult to deal with the fact that if you talk about women having a roster of potential love interests, and you have to sit on that roster and wait, hopefully, maybe, to be the one that's chosen to be with your prospective partner. And the minute you talk about that, somebody comes up and says, well, what about the double standard between men and women, how men are considered studs when they sleep with multiple women, and women are considered sluts when they sleep with multiple men? Quite frankly, if you're engaging in that conversation and you see that, point out that, hey, when we're having the conversation about women's issues, that's a conversation in box A. When we're having the conversation about men's issues, that's a conversation in box B. Right now, we're talking about the roster problem. And if you've spent any amount of time on certain areas of TikTok, then you probably know about the roster problem. women who have multiple men on speed dial that they aren't quite dating, but definitely, maybe, potentially, possibly could, but, you know, we'll certainly be expected to take. I'm not saying this is an issue I've personally dealt with, but it's an issue that I've seen. It's an issue that I've seen a lot. And we sweep it under the rug, and then you know who talks about that issue? You know who speaks on that issue? People like Jordan Peterson, people like Ben Shapiro, people like Matt Walsh, people like Andrew Tate. When those are the only people speaking on that issue, guess what? Guess what the fuck happens? You've lost that lonely guy who is stuck in that roster to the worst people on the fucking internet. Traveler Salesman says, what's the roster problem? So the roster problem is this. Men, by and large, if we find somebody that we like and we want to be with, the likelihood of us jumping at the chance to be with that person is much higher, statistically, across the board. Women, on the other hand, have the ability to pick and choose more often than not. And again, you can... I have to keep on heading this off at the pass. There's going to be somebody in the comment section who says that's not been their particular experience. That's a wonderful anecdote. I don't care. But the concept of a lady with a list or a lady with a roster of people and potential love interests who you are one of, and you just sit there and pray that maybe, just maybe, you'll measure up compared to the other people that are being talked about. Or you might not even know they're there. This causes us to run into a fuck ton of problems. Because then, guys spend their time pursuing people who will never end up dating them, more than likely, because they're one of 10, one of 20, one of 30, one of 5. Ashley says, where is the evidence to back up your claim? Do you want me to go and survey every single person in Atlanta? And ask how many guys have a group of girls on speed dial for getting dinner with? Versus how many girls have a group of guys on speed dial for getting dinner with? I could do that if you want. You wouldn't like the results. Robot voice goes burr. Said, I want you to cite a study. You want me to pull a study directly out of my butt right now? Versus the breadth of experience over the last 30 years. Again, this is the pushback thing. This is the pushback thing. This is a thing that is experienced, by and large, by a lot of guys. But here, let's see here. Why do you need to study to prove there's no reason to be an abusive prick? Yep. You're just one person, though. Like, someone must have studied this, right? Sure. Go ahead. Google a study. Have fun. I'm in the middle of recording a video. I could maybe give you a study in a couple days when I've had a little bit of time. But it's not one that I have sitting at my ready for the course of this video, nor do I owe it to you. But the fact of the matter is, this is a thing that is experienced quite a bit. It is easier for women to get dates than it is for men to get dates. Now, whether or not it's easier to find a person you should be in a relationship, that's a different conversation. But there's another issue we run into when it comes to guys. By and large, a lot of us feel disposable. Ashley says, you've always seemed on the right side of things. I'm just so disappointed you'd make red pill claims with zero evidence. What you're saying really makes no sense. So, Ashley, let me ask you a question. Are you saying that it makes no sense that women, by and large, in the dating scene, can find male prospective partners easier, just for dates, not for a long-term relationship, just for dates, than it is for men to find women prospective partners in the dating scene, by and large? What part of this is the I'm not trying to do the red pill thing here. I don't give a shit about that. What I'm saying is, this is a reality that happens as part of the human experience. Maybe because they aren't as picky. I mean, why would women have some special advantage? Why would women have some special advantage? So, a lot of guys, for better or worse, can be fairly superficial. Maybe it is that women are more picky. But here's the thing, the why does not matter, Ashley. Once you start asking about the why, you've accepted that it is a thing that happens in reality. Once you've talked about why is that the case, we're already on the same page that it happens. The reason why does not matter as much, because for the purpose of this conversation, what I am pointing out is that the people who speak on this issue in a way that would be allies to us, to progressives to the left, the people who speak on this issue more in a way that speaks to those men who feel lonely, who feel emotionally vulnerable, the group of people who are speaking to those men more often, most of the time, are not the voices on the left. I'm saying we need to do better about that. I'm saying we need to do better towards those people, those would-be allies. That is my point. My point is not how do we improve the dating scene or how do we break down the dating scene between men and women. No, my point is there are people, for one reason or another, who believe this about the dating scene, and as a result, the people they gravitate to are toxic assholes. So how do we cultivate a space in the left that can prevent those people from gravitating to toxic assholes? That is my point. While I believe it to be the case that women, AFAB people, have it easier in the dating scene than men do, by and large, I also believe 100% that whether that is reality or not does not matter. Because what matters is there is a large swath of the population that believes this, and they make decisions based on that belief. That belief that things are easier for women than they are in men in this one particular area leads them down the road of watching Joe Rogan more, watching Andrew Tate more, watching Matt Walsh more, because these are the people that they think are speaking to them and about them and in favor of them on these issues. And when they start on that rabbit hole, they start listening to the other toxic shit those people are saying. If we had people on the left, by and large, who were known for speaking on these issues, more than just Vosh and Shark, who were known for speaking on these issues in a way that resonated with those people without the pushbacks, in a way that accepted that this is a thing you believe, here's where we go from there. My argument is that we would have more people that would gravitate towards progressivism than regressive right-wing ideology. Unfortunately, the people who are talking about men's issues in these ways, in a way that speaks to these people, come packaged with regressive right-wing ideology. Progressive left-wing conversations and talking points a lot of times do not come hand in hand with these things. And this runs us into our next issue. When you feel disposable, that puts you into a vulnerable pit. That puts you into an awful fucking mind state. And by and large, a lot of guys, they feel disposable. It's not just because of the roster issue. Did also Xander Hall exist, by the way? I know Xan exists. I'm friends with Xan. When you start talking about the fact that every year thousands of men die in coal mines, in sewers, and railroads, working on satellite towers, and other dangerous workplaces, that conversation gets kind of skirted under the rug a lot. Ash says, I'm sorry you've had bad experiences. You can't use anecdotes to make a larger point, though. Ashley, I've not said anything about my experiences, though. Not once have I said anything about my experiences. These are the experiences of multiple people that I have talked to about these issues. These are the experiences of multiple people who have talked about these issues themselves. And more importantly, these are the ways that the people that you do not want taking the people from your movement are talking about these issues. And when you ignore that, that's when you lose. When you ignore the way that your enemy is recruiting your friends, you fail to find a way to combat it. So you actually did rewind and check the tape, friend? Well, cool, I'll do that in the middle of my recording somehow. But I've made my point. Said there's no crisis of masculinity. It's right-wing propaganda that's resonating with lonely men is all. I think there's probably just as many as lonely women. So you admit that it is resonating with them. You admit that it's resonating with them then. Cool. That's all that matters. That's my point, Ashley. That's my point. My point 100% is that this is language that is resonating with. It works as a recruitment technique, Ashley. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying we do a poor job of countering it, because just going, actually, no, this is all wrong, it doesn't work all the time. It doesn't even work enough of the time. Whether or not there is a, quote, crisis of masculinity doesn't matter. The fact is, there is enough people who believe there is a crisis of masculinity, that are willing to start listening primarily to the Jordan Petersons of the world. Our job is to find out how to take those people and prevent them from falling further down the right-wing pipeline. At least more of them than not. That is our problem, and the fact that I'm having this argument with you right now in the middle of this video exemplifies that problem to a T. So you even brought up this type of rebuttal earlier in the discussion? I did. By and large, if we want to see fewer people who fall into the rhetoric of some of the most terrible actors on the internet, then we need to find a way to not only show them that the issues that they're talking, we've found a problem. We found a problem. The problem is that there are actors on the internet that are speaking to people. The tactic that we have classically used is to tell people that the thing they're talking about isn't real and isn't a problem and isn't a thing that they should be worried about. That tactic, I believe, does not work all the time because I have seen multiple instances of its failure. These are personal anecdotes, true, 100%. But it's not just boomers who are running into this. It's not just older people who will eventually die out. These spaces affirm people who think that masculinity is such a great thing to be celebrated. And I'm not talking about toxic masculinity. I'm not talking about the tendency for men to feel like their emotions need to be stunted for people, though that's an issue as well that we need to talk about. I'm talking about people who love sports and think that sports are some celebration of masculinity, who love construction and military things and think that these are celebrations of masculinity. These people have a set of values that is not necessarily incongruent with progressivism. But by not speaking to these people, they will end up listening to the people who are speaking to that. And when they listen to those people, their ideology will change to one that is no longer progressive. If you've ever seen a loved one fall down the right-wing pipeline, if it was a guy who considered themselves masculine in some way, shape, or form, talk with them and ask them what issues were spoken on that convinced them, that led them down that road. If you want to figure out how you stop recruitment for right-wing pundits, you talk to people who have been recruited by right-wing pundits. You speak to people that it happened to. Do you want to see femininity turn into something that is positive, that is not just the trad wife doctrine? You focus on feminism. You want to see masculinity turn into something that is not toxic masculinity? Then you focus on that. There may not be a specific word for it because the men's rights activism movement has been completely and totally populated by people who are the worst shit stains on the face of the planet. However, there are some things that are spoken on in those circles that are true and we need to handle. He just says it's always dog whistles as far as I've seen. Depends on the dog whistle. Said case in point, homophobes who were fine with gay people until gay people wanted to get married. Or homophobes that are fine with gay people as long as gay people don't go outside and they have to see, or their kids have to see them holding hands. I'll conclude this by simply saying we do not do a good enough job. People who see sports as a lens of culture and masculinity, people who have the awkward ideal in their head that strength is the only thing that matters, people who worry about how boys are being raised to be this, that, or the other thing, those people are not talked to enough on our side. We can do better about that. We should do better about that. And I'm going to be trying to do better about that. And there's going to be a lot of people on my channel who are probably not happy about that. And that's fine. If I let every viewer on my channel dictate my opinions, they wouldn't be mine anymore. Beat Blaster says, I can speak on this issue. Used to be a huge right-wing asshole because I was lonely, angry, and wanted to lash out at other people. Looking through bits of the chat here. Dead Inside says, by ignoring men's issues, you handed the worst people a group of emotionally vulnerable people that will believe their every word. Think of it this way. Think of it this way. Let's say you've had a breakup. And somebody incredibly toxic comes your way but they're sexy. And they are somebody that is willing to spend every waking moment taking care of you, affirming you, letting you know that you matter, your opinions matter, and you're just very special to them. Let's say that the thing that broke up your last relationship was not being heard, not being spoken to. This person may be a manipulator that you're going to. This person may be the worst asshole in the world. They may hurt you. But the fact that they're speaking to those vulnerabilities, those open wounds that you have, that's going to make them very, very attractive. That's very, very dangerous. That's what happens in right-wing punditry. Take the person who is seeing the hashtag kill all men, who is seeing the slogans that are being used, who is seeing the mentality that comes from that, the conversation about all men being either useless or most men being rapists or shit like that. Especially if they're seeing that through the lens of people like Isaac Butterfield. When they're seeing that, they're getting not only a distorted version of reality, but they're getting a version of reality that includes people who they should be allies with being their enemies. And then they end up sliding with that toxic, abusive person that is willing to use them for their own gains, but they're willing to affirm them, and they're willing to make them feel special. Said, you're describing indoctrination. Decoy sheep, I am exactly describing indoctrination. Making you feel special, love bombing you, letting you know that everything's going to be okay now because you're over here, and don't worry, the entire world is wrong. You're the one who's been seeing things right the whole time. It's a really effective indoctrination technique. And you can bet your ass it is a technique that people like Andrew Tate take full advantage of. You want fewer people falling for that? Get better at bulwarking people from it now. The only way to do that is to get better at your own rhetoric. So it reminds me of my altercation with the Hubbard fans to say. I said, look, there isn't much we can do about people who refuse to get therapy. We solve nothing by changing our priorities on the left for people who... Oh, the message got deleted as I was reading it. But I think I kind of caught the gist of it. So here's my pushback on that. Nobody is saying change priorities on the left. Nobody is saying deprioritize trans people and deprioritize people who are in social minorities, or deprioritize conversations about people who need to get health care, or deprioritize conversations about unions. Nobody, at least not me, is saying deprioritize those things. I'm not saying shift priorities. I'm saying add one more. And I think by adding one more, we can prevent a lot of loss. That's what I'm saying. That's my point. Yeah, that began to sound pretty brain dead after I posted it. You're fine, Traveler Salesman, you're fine. But it did let me articulate a point that I wasn't quite getting to. I'm not saying shift priorities from people who are vulnerable so that you can focus on people who largely aren't as vulnerable but just feel more vulnerable and are then getting spoken to who desperately need therapy. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that those people should be included in the conversation. Better than we have been. Because if we had been doing better at that conversation, then we wouldn't see Andrew Tate's numbers be what they are. That's what I'm saying. But with that said, I've probably pissed off everybody in my audience and alienated at least half of them. So let me know what you think in the comments section below. Hit the like button if you haven't already. Subscribe if you haven't already. And hopefully this particular arc won't end in everything burning. Insert end of video tagline here.